you have a little bit about bit of blah, blah. You have a little bit of background about me, but a little bit more is so I have a background in behavioral science management and HR. And now what I do is help organizations and individuals with their systems and communication, mainly focused around neurodiversity, but more so now equity and inclusion and diversity as a whole. I'm also an artist. I've worked in art galleries in Vancouver, Toronto, and the UK, and I do commissions for doing wall murals and recreate furniture into pieces of art. This works really well for me to have part of my work week on the computer and using my mind, and then the rest of the week to play with some paint. In today's presentation, I want to take you on a journey first through the lens of a neurotypical person working and learning in the field of neurodiversity, and then in the eyes of someone who's living through it. I'll never forget the pivotal moment when I realized that my perspective had changed. Back when I was a behavioral therapist, I thought I had it all figured out, but it took a late diagnosis of ADHD to understand the power of empathy and listening. Suddenly, the strategies that I had been teaching others didn't quite fit my own puzzle. It was hard to understand this new label of being broken, but through my own journey of self-discovery and education, I've come to embrace the unique gifts that neurodiversity brings. I'm here today to share a little bit about my journey, but before we dive in, let's talk a little bit about numbers. Did you know that 1 in 5 people are neurodivergent? Yet despite the prevalence, a whopping 76 choose not to disclose their condition, and 30, my mouth's not working today, 51% of them feel undervalued and unsupported at work. Presently, the latest numbers show that 53% of Gen Z identify as neurodivergent, and by 2050, half of the world's population will be neurodivergent. So we will be looking at a literal flip of the minority. So what does this mean for us? Now is the time to embrace and take the time to understand the spectrum of human minds, because understanding each other's quirks, communication styles, and unique ways of working isn't about being nice. It's about fostering a culture of inclusivity, boosting productivity, and sparking innovation. I have come to understand the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. Humans are complex beings, each with our own intricate tapestry of traits and tendencies. Humans feel the need to categorize and classify, but the truth is there's no one size fits all when it comes to neurodiversity. As we navigate this together today, I need to let you know that I'm not an expert. I've had the opportunity to spend years surrounded by neurodivergent individuals in both my personal and work life, and I have yet to meet two who are alike. Dr. Wendy Kerr's words resonate with me deeply. It's impossible to be an expert. Instead, what we can do is foster an environment of openness, empathy, and understanding, because at the end of the day, it's our individual actions, knowledge, and attitudes that pave the way for true neuro inclusivity. So what falls under the neurodivergent umbrella? Well, it really depends on who you ask. The list is constantly evolving. It includes conditions such as autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and ADHD, among many others. And it is also very common for the characteristics to overlap, and many neurodivergent individuals have co-occurring conditions. That starts with defining some of the terms. The term neurodiversity acknowledges that each of us have our own distinct brain wired in our own unique way. Neurotypical, there actually isn't a single definition of what a normal brain looks like. Neurotypical is an informal term that we use to describe a person whose brain functions are considered typical, usual, average, or expected by society. And then we have neurodivergent. And this describes someone who isn't neurotypical, which generally refers to differences in brain function. This is someone whose brain diverges from the average or the norm. My head is in the way. I'm just going to move me out of there. The best way I've heard to describe neurodiversity is by using a Spiky profile, which depicts an individual's skill set. Everybody has a Spiky profile, as we all have different strengths and challenges in different areas. The neurodivergent special abilities and creativity is associated with some of our spiky profiles, especially when combined with intrinsic motivation. It can be very powerful. So on the left here, you can see the rings. So the center point is the more challenging skills. The middle ring depicts the average or the norm, and the outer ring depicts exceptional abilities. So most of you have heard the term being high or low on the spectrum, and it's not really that way. It's more peaks and valleys. And so people who are neurodivergent tend to have a skill profile that's spikier, and it has more of these peaks and valleys instead of a more consistent middle ground. So neurodiversity in the workplace offers a range of benefits, particularly when included in a diversified team that both include linear and visual thinkers. People all don't think the same. Visual thinkers think more in pictures, and verbal thinkers think more in words, each utilizing either more of the left or right hand side of the hemisphere of your brain. Most of us use a combination of both the linear and visual thinking, but tend to be more on one side or the other. I was actually really blown away when I realized that not everyone thought the same way that I did. And I had to kind of test my theory on my husband, who is the poster boy for neurotypical. I can't say that he really loves being my guinea pig, but that's what he signed up for. I'm very much a visual thinker. So verbal thinkers, like my husband, tend to think more linearly, and when you're a verbal thinker, you think at the same speed as speech. And so when you think about it, you will talk to yourself in your mind, or in the case of my husband, out loud, when you're trying to figure something out. So now I understand why he drives me bananas when he's trying to put together a piece of IKEA furniture and he tells me play by play exactly what he's doing. So when visual thinkers process information, it's more like scenes from a movie. This nonverbal thought process happens much faster than verbal thinking. It is often subliminal, below the conscious awareness, and this explains why dyslexics are often unaware of their errors or how they came to solve a problem. Me personally, I love to be constantly redesigning our home, moving our furniture from room to room and destroying the walls as I move things up and down the stairs, which drives my husband bananas. But I don't need to measure to see if something will fit. All I have to do is close my eyes. I can visualize all the different pieces in the room, and I can figure out in my mind what's going to work and what isn't. And if there's something that I don't like, I'll bring it downstairs, restrip it, and repaint it and create something new. And here's where we end up coming to the neurodiversity paradigm. The paradigm considers autism and other forms of neurodivergence, such as ADHD, dyslexia, etc., to be a natural product of biological diversity and evolution. From this framework, ADHD and autism are understood not as a disorder, but as a diverse neurotype. Instead of viewing neurological differences as deficits, it celebrates them as a valuable variation that enhance our collective and human experience. It's a viewpoint that embraces the beauty of our diversity and recognizes that every brain has its own unique brilliance to offer. And so in the same way that there's no right social class, race, gender, or sexual orientation, there is no one right neurotype. There isn't a right way for a brain to be wired. And I also added in the word sonder. I think it's beautiful. It's the realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own. And I think that's very telling. So let's jump into a little case study. Let's meet Frazzled Freda. And as a bit of a disclaimer, this is a sample of traits from a few different neurotypes. So everyone presents completely differently. So Freda could be similar to someone you know or not at all. So here's Frida. She's having a really hard time in the office. She doesn't seem to say much, and when she does, she says way too much. Half the time she arrives late, she can seem irritated for no reason at all. Her desk is a mess. She's up and down and in and out of her office. She doesn't join us in the lunchroom, but when she does, she talks off topic. It's hard to include her when she doesn't seem like she gets our jokes, and honestly, she doesn't seem like she really wants to get to know us um, at all. So how is our Frida feeling? Frida is doing her best to hold it together. The lights, scent, sounds, and the constant interruptions in the office make it hard for her to concentrate. When she finally gets into the flow of project, she gets pulled away, and the sudden transitions can actually feel painful. When she gets called into a meeting without any warning, not having an agenda makes her feel anxious and unprepared. Usually she would doodle with a doodle or fiddle with a pen to help her focus, but that looks unprofessional, so she forces herself to watch the presenter. But she really doesn't retain that much information in these sessions, in these situations. She sees everyone else getting along and making plans after work, but she doesn't know how to break in with the crowd. She is very aware that she's different and wishes that she has the same sense of belonging that everyone else seems to have. She would like to ask for help from her superiors, but feeling disclosing her diagnosis and what she's going through will make her feel more alienated than she is now. So why are these things happening to Frida? So she's feeling some sensory overload. There's so much information coming in at once from the environment, trying to decipher the intent of your words. It can be overwhelming and can cause irritability. For myself, I may never stop moving or talking, but I can't think when people are moving and talking around me. I physically can't read in a busy office environment. I need to be working off somewhere quietly on my own. Then we have issues with working memory and executive functioning. So when you have trouble with your executive functioning, it can make it hard to focus, follow directions, and handle your emotions, among other things. It would really help if you had clear plans and at times assistance breaking down projects or using tools such as mind mapping or graphic note taking. Time blindness. This is me to a T. Time blindness is when you can't conceptualize how long something will take or have any kind of sense of how long something or how much time has passed. I have terrible time blindness. To me, everything takes 5 minutes. And I can work for hours without realizing, and half the time I've missed my lunch. We also have rejection sensitivity disorder, or you may hear it called just RSD, which can happen when you can't regulate your emotions to your feelings of failure, rejection, or possible rejection. It can cause overwhelming levels of emotional pain. This can also lead to perfectionism, trying to find a way to avoid any possible rejection. Emotional dysregulation. At our times, our emotions don't fit the situation. Our highs are very high and our lows are hard. Even I know when I'm overreacting to a situation, I can't get out of it. So I just need to have a little bit of time off on my own to get out of the funk, to be able just to let things go. Imposter syndrome. So people who struggle with imposter syndrome believe that they aren't as competent or as intelligent as others might think. And soon enough that someone will come in and discover the truth about them. People who have imposter syndrome are typically very successful, and they're probably the last person you would ever think that would have doubts about their own abilities. And then we have masking. So masking is camouflaging or hiding who you are, how you're feeling, so you fit in with others. Trying to figure out how to be socially acceptable. This includes feelings of anxiety or being overwhelmed or pretending you can handle things in your office. So like both of my girls are neurodivergent, and my one daughter, when she comes home from high school, she will tell me that she watches TV to be able to figure out how people are communicating so that she can reenact that when she's at school. it can be a very stressful situation. Does it have to be this way? No way. So with a bit of understanding, education, and organizational adjustments that can benefit the entire team, we can create a productive and inclusive culture. So what are some of the benefits of hiring someone who is neurodiverse? Neurodivergent individuals bring unique skills and perspectives that give them the competitive advantage. These benefits include enhanced information processing. Some autistic individuals have a remarkable ability to be able to process information quickly and accurately, catching details that others might miss. And then there's the creativity and problem solving of ADHD. Think creativity, risk-taking, energy, and being able to juggle multiple tasks. When channeled effectively, these traits can ignite innovation and drive progress into any organization. Dyslexic individuals often possess a knack for spotting connections and patterns. You can have elevated productivity. Studies have shown that autistic professionals can be supercharged when it comes to productivity, sometimes outpacing their neurotypical counterparts by a staggering 90% to 140%. Diversity of thought leads to innovation. Neurodivergent individuals bring fresh perspectives and out-of-the-box thinking to the table and push teams to think differently to solve problems and innovation. Just ask SAP, which is a software organization where when an autistic employee's technical fix saved the company over $40 million. But it's not just about the individual benefits. Prioritizing, I can't move my mouth today. Diversity pays dividends across the board. Teams that embrace diversity can see up to a 30% boost in productivity, while companies foster inclusivity experience high rates of retention, often exceeding 90%. And when you create an environment where people feel valued and included, it can lead to higher engagement and a stronger sense of belonging. So why does all that matter? In today's competitive landscape, attracting top talent is critical. And diversity, equity, inclusion are on the top of the wish list for job seekers. So when employees aren't feeling comfortable bringing their whole selves to work, we miss out on much more than their sparkling personalities. We lose the creativity, critical thinking skills, and resourcefulness that go hand in hand with safety. No psychological safety, no risk-taking, no innovation. So me, for example, I can be impulsive, but it's because of that impulsivity I can think quickly and jump into action when there's a crisis. Because I love challenges and adventure has given me the ability to work and travel to over 40 countries. My mind is constantly processing, which is extremely tiring, but it helps me with my creativity. I am excellent at problem solving, and it is really difficult for me to stop until I find a solution. Because I'm a visual thinker, it helps me see the whole picture or a situation, which is not as easy as someone who thinks linearly. And I may arrive late, more often than not, 15 minutes later. So, but due to my hyper focus and perfectionism, I can work for hours at a time without realizing that I've been doing so. So if you think about having a diverse team, having neurotypical and neurodivergent individuals on a team, think of neurodivergence as kind of like the sriracha sauce for your meal. If you were to have a plate full of sriracha, it would probably be too much, be way too spicy. But if you have a little bit of everything and you have a little spice on top, that's when you have a great meal or a great thing comes together. So let's move on to language and labels. So language and labels, they have changed over time, and the history of diagnoses would be shocking to most of us today. Up until 1973, homosexuality was listed as a sociopathic personality disorder, and autism was also thought to be a type of childhood schizophrenia. Another example of how specific groups of people have been pathologized is how we used to view left-handed people. A psychiatrist from New York warned that that unless restrained, left-handed children risk severe and lifelong mental and cognitive deficits. What language do we use to describe each other is a sensitive topic today. We all get terminology wrong from time to time, and what is suitable for one person could be wrong for another. Our fear of saying the wrong thing inhibits learning and inclusion, so having grace and kindness is of utmost importance. Everyone gets to choose their own language. Labels are very personal. Some people prefer person-first language and others don't. Some people believe that if language is needed to separate them from who they are, then who they are is negative. They may prefer to use identity first language because they feel that who they are is a core component of their identity. We have to be cognizant of labels because it can cause a sense of otherness. When it's constantly in the limelight, being labeled neurodivergent or neurotypical, it can make you feel like you're in one camp or the other when it's far more complex. Recalling my own experience with diagnosis and labels was very challenging because it threatened my own view of my own identity and who I thought I was. When I received my diagnosis at the age of 40, it was recommended by one of my friends who's a behavior analyst to read one of Russell Barkley's books called Taking Charge of Your Adult ADHD. And I tried to read that book 3 times and I couldn't. I put it down. It was way too overwhelming. The book described the traits. I think there was like 44 traits. And it was the same as when as a good friend would describe me. I couldn't figure out where ADHD ended and I began. There was a real grieving process, but it helped me to understand the sensitivity around language and labels. For many philosophers, the way we talk about something is more than just words, but frames the way we think about ourselves and about each other. So let's say by viewing an autistic person as disordered, it can reduce the individual's sense of self-worth and self-esteem. Decker suggested that an autistic advocate use a language that carried a more positive connotation when talking about the differences. So here's a couple of examples. So you could say in the medical model that he was lacking a theory of mind, or you can say engaging in a social life from a different perspective. You could say lacking executive functioning skills, or a strength in problem solving that doesn't require verbal processing, lack of flexibility, or a different way of being flexible, a weak drive towards central coherence, or a really good eye for detail, passing as normal, or failing to pretend to be something that they were never meant to be. So we are understanding traits, stereotypes, bias, and stigma. So we all have bias. It's human nature, and that's okay. We only know what we're exposed to, and most of the time it's without realizing. What is important is to have reflection, to ask yourself why you responded in a certain way to a situation, and remain curious about your own assumptions and bias. I remember I was asked for advice from an executive coach friend of mine who had a client who was having a hard time communicating with a neurodivergent colleague. She expressed that she was having a hard time with her coworker calling her outside work hours, had all these different ideas, requesting information and forgetting that she'd asked, and among other things. And I immediately felt animosity towards this manager for not taking the time to understand and support this neurodivergent employee until my friend corrected me. I had jumped to the conclusion that it was a frontline worker who was neurodivergent, but it was actually the manager. And I was shocked when my animosity quickly turned to empathy for the manager, as this reflected my own lived experience. Without continuing education and systems, people can be unfairly judged in the workplace. like an example of this is the stereotype that someone who is autistic doesn't have empathy or emotionality. Of course they do. Everybody expresses or experiences emotions differently. Some autistic individuals have hyperempathy. They're extremely in tuned and impacted by pain and suffering. I have friends who may not be able to express how they're feeling verbally at the moment, but can tell you in a different way. They could write about it, or they could use a metaphor to describe what's going on for them. Uh, Sorry, I was going to say something here and I completely forgot what I was going to bring in. The other thing is understanding awareness. I had when I was working as a manager, one of my staff came to me. She was a behavioral therapist and she was asking to come off a team. She said that when she came in, when she arrived at the home every time to work with this one individual, when the mother answered the door, she's like, this mother hates me. She doesn't say hello. She basically just swings open the door and she leaves, and it's just very hard. Like every day I'm just like dragging my feet. I do not want to be going in there. I need off the team. So I contacted the family and I was just inquiring how everything was going. And this woman was gushing over this one worker. She was saying what a great job she was doing and what a difference she was making and how happy her child was and how much she had been accomplishing. And so she didn't realize the impression of what that she was giving off. And so to kind of expect greater complexity and be curious and find out, get some more information around the situation before you jump to conclusions, will be able to lead to better communication. So how can we discuss supporting neurodiversity without discussing the complexity of intersectionality? So again, take me for example. I have ADHD. I'm basically living the life of a single mother because my husband works in Alberta for 5 or 6 weeks at a time. Both of my kids are neurodiverse, so I have extra meetings with teachers and specialists. I live in a very remote area, so my commute is about an hour into the office. So the complexity of my ADHD aside, between my girls' extracurriculars, groceries, house tutors, all the things, you get the picture, and maybe hopefully squeezing in a run or a visit with a friend at some point, working a 40-hour work week, can be very challenging. But then when you add in the complexity of ADHD back in, sprinkle that with job performance and anxiety, and a little bit of perfectionism, a 40-hour work week would break me. And so here's some other examples to kind of consider. So let's say you have a woman who is from the Philippines working here in Canada, and she has to present to a boardroom of white male managers. She's going to have to work 10 times as hard to ensure that presentation is perfect. Or an African-American man who has ADHD and lives in the United States. His job requires him to work out in the community, but due to his ADHD, he can get really overwhelmed in certain situations, and he doesn't have the luxury of creating a scene in public. What about the complexity of having access to assessment or to being misdiagnosed? There's extensive evidence that certain groups, particularly females and those from Black, Asian, or other minority ethnic groups, may have been either missed, don't have the same access to assessments, or have been misdiagnosed, which is sadly common due to judgment and stereotyping. So what's the word on the street? What are we as neurodiverse individuals being told by society and social media? We're being told not to disclose. to hide who you are. If you need to disclose, present only what you need support with. So here's a bit of an example from my own life. So my interview skills are terrible. Due to my executive functioning, I can't recall personal experiences on the spot, especially if I'm nervous. So if I'm in an interview and they ask me a scenario question, no problem, I've got it. But if you ask me to remember a time when I showed leadership, I've been in management for 15 years. I won't be able to think of one. My mind will go completely blank. So if I don't disclose, my interview bombs. If I do disclose, I've been asked questions like, if you need to have the questions before the interview, are you going to be able to handle fires and rapid responses? In my experience in management and HR, quick fire responses to situations always lead to bigger fires. I've tried to explain that in person, but the person interviewing me has already made their decision about my capabilities. It's a really tricky situation. I've also been told to dumb down my resume because of my interview skills, and that I should just apply to a position that's below my abilities and work my way up. I've been told not to disclose that a 30-hour work week would be optimal for me and my family. Instead, I was told to use the system and wait until the probationary period was over, and then get a doctor's note to state that I had high anxiety or something to be able to reduce my hours. So how does this create a trusting and safe workplace? It's essential that we learn how we each prefer to communicate and understand differences about communication. If you think about it as a different culture, there's a psychologist in the United States. Her name is Dr. Megan Anna Nuff, and she's kind of amazing. She has autism and ADHD, and she's a psychologist. She describes her marriage, which is the same as mine, as being a cross-cultural relationship. So she's not autistic ADHDer, and her husband is neurotypical. So if you take the time to understand how each other work, then it can be interesting, frustrating, and usually hilarious. If you think about it this way, part of the diagnostic criteria for autism is communication. If two autistic individuals are having a conversation and neither of them notice that they have poor eye contact or are taking a little bit longer to respond to a question, is it still a deficit in communication? I think part of the issue is understanding the why. When we hear things like someone has slow processing, it makes you think that that person might be unintelligent. But what really is happening is more what Dr. Nuff describes as deep processing. So it's not that the processing is actually slow, there's just so much information coming in. So I'm taking in what you're saying to me. I might have a hard time reading your face, so I'm trying to get the context. What you're saying is sparking different ideas in my head, so I'm trying to work on all of those as well. And then you have the external environment of noises or different things going on. So it's not a slow processing, it's just there's so much information that you're processing that it seems slower. So it's just to kind of, if you understand what's actually happening, then you have more empathy and understanding towards the situation. If you think about it, like processing is almost like if you were driving in a car. So let's say you're on vacation, it was you and your partner and your kids in your place that you've never been before. The kids are singing in the back. Your partner's talking about how they're hungry and they're trying to decide on if they want burgers or subs. And you realize that you're lost. What is the first thing that you do? You ask everyone to kind of quiet down and you turn down the music so that you're able to think and find your way back. So that's kind of what's happening, is there's just so much information, it's hard to think and process when everything else is going on. So some communication kind of guidelines to follow. Less is more. Always use clear, concise language. Ambiguity can be a trigger. So qualities such as excellent communication skills, or a good team player, or job duties such as perform any other related tasks as required, are usually included as defaults on many job posts. Many autistics or ADHDers will not consider themselves eligible for a job with these vague descriptors. How does someone know if their communication skills are excellent or excellent enough? Instead, describe the skills that are required. Like we could say, in this position, you'll be communicating face-to-face with customers about the product, or we'll be participating in weekly team meetings. On the other hand, knowing more is better. So it's better to know what to expect. Try to avoid surprise meeting, offer notes beforehand. By doing so, it allows individuals, especially dyslexic thinkers, to gather their thoughts, ensure active and meaningful participation, and always follow up with post-meeting notes. Literally, understand that some of us are literal thinkers and we are not great at understanding sarcasm or idioms. Also, if you don't know what I mean, ask me. What about having everyone fill out a survey on their communication preferences? So for me, if you want me to do something for you, I've always told my team that you need to send it in an email instead of a text. If you send it in a text, it's gone. An email is like my inbox, and it'll happen. I've always let people know that, if I have forgotten to do something, that it's okay to please remind me. People were always worried about feeling rude, but by letting everybody know where my challenges are, and if they want something to get done, that to send me that reminder, then we have that transparent communication. I've also let people know, and this is very common for individuals who are autistic or have ADHD, that I'm a late listener. If you come into my office and I'm concentrating on something, wait, say my name and wait for me to attend to you. If you don't, I just keep reading and I don't know that you're even starting to talk to me. And this can come across without that communication that I'm being rude or I don't value your opinion, which I very much do. Is just this, it's like an unintentional mistake that with open communication, we can break down those barriers, and there'll be a lot less misunderstandings and hurt feelings. So let's quickly get through the last couple of slides. And so let's talk about a couple of the different organizational changes that we can put in that are quite helpful. So the environment that we work in and the people we work with make all the difference to our success, productivity, and well-being. Modern society, we tend to design systems which are for the average person or for the average person, but what does average really mean? So who was really normal? Who was typical? Normal, as Jodie Foster said, is not something to aspire to, it's something to get away from. And if we try to design systems to are for the average person or the normal person, who's being left out all the time? Einstein didn't talk till he was 5. And if you look at a map across the world, you can see the varying average heights for different people in different countries. We often design our environments by these rigid specifications for the average person who there really isn't. So say we talk about kitchen counters. Um, if you're like me, I'm relatively tall. The kitchens are always at the wrong height because they're designed for a man of a certain height. My mother, she's 5'2", so I was always the grabber of things. And you see that, and if you look around our population, we've got 1 in 3 people who are short-sighted, 1 in 12 males are colorblind, 10% of people write with their left hand. You start to say, who is average and who are we designing this specifically for? NASA actually wanted to create a perfect chair for space travel, and so they took measurements of all the astronauts to create this chair, and in the end, the chair fit nobody. Education has been focused on ensuring average standards and average approaches, and workplaces have often used a standardized recruitment process. So we favor doing things a certain way that fit society, but it doesn't really fit society. So by having these rigid approaches, we miss out on people who do things differently from the norm. So an accommodation or an adjustment is a workplace or a process modification that supports an employee to be more productive. It's necessary. It's not a personal preference or privilege. The term reasonable accommodation suggests that someone else decides what's reasonable for you. We all know that 33% of new hires leave within the first 3 months, and that's not only expensive, but it brings down production and morale. Most modifications are free or under $500. And actually, it's usually most accommodations are requested by neurotypicals, for example, a flexible work schedule to be able to pick up their kids, etc. That seems surprising, but it doesn't really seem so surprising to me. There's so much shame and fear around asking for help that I will do everything that I can to find a solution first before I come to you and ask you for help. So some examples of different organizational supports. We have universal design modifications, have noise canceling headsets, alternative lighting, quiet areas, uncluttered workspaces or halls, hybrid workspaces, or remote. So my personal favorite is hybrid. I love going into work, getting dressed, having my days of peopling, and then coming home and being able to work where there's no noise, no quiet, and get all my reports done. So in this picture here, this is my girl cave, my office. I have found, because I tend to work for hours without stopping, that I'll set my timer for an hour, and I have my erg, my rowing machine. So once an hour, I get up and I erg for a song, and then that keeps my mental clarity. My honey bought me this chair, which so I can sit cross-legged, backwards, forwards, whatever which way, so I can move around. I have my double screens, which is extremely helpful because I'm a very visual person to be able to see the different things happening at the same time. It's super effective. Or what about our moving from in-person interviews to interviews based on skill set? Organizations like Deloitte and EI have moved to super weeks so individuals have time to showcase their strengths. Support all of your employees by providing these adaptations to their needs universally. Everybody works different and works better in different environments and has strengths and challenges. Would it only be the neurodivergent individual who prefers a quiet workspace or appreciates being able to use talk-to-text software? Having adaptive text such as text help on all computers, data shows that it increases productivity for everyone. What about if upper management is open with their team about their differences? This creates personal safety and predictability and team cohesion. Sharing your faults and challenges makes you more in the eyes of another, not less. And it doesn't have to be in a formal way. When I was managing a team of 80 and I was wearing many hats, I would always say, I haven't, let everybody know, I don't have any memory. just between ADHD and kids, everything just disappears. Please come and let me know. So by having that openness, I found that it really opened the door that people came to me, because we had that transparency, that it was okay to have different differences. So for individualized support, so what about instead of waiting for someone to ask for support, why don't you offer it first? So for example, let's say when you're hiring, instead of saying, would you like any accommodations? You can say, here's a list of accommodations that we've tried in the past. Would any of these work for you, or do you have any other suggestions? This would be super helpful for someone who English is their second language, or people with anxiety. Creative weekly planning and time blocking, by schedule meetings back to back and having longer work days and work times is super beneficial for to lessen all the different transitions and giving you more time of focus time. The other one that has been super helpful for me is I'm loving AI. AI has been amazing for neurodiversity. Businesses are exploring AI applications such as speech recognition, inclusive technologies, and automation to improve productivity, communication, and inclusivity. Personally, I've been loving Fathom and Otter. I have a really hard time taking notes in a meeting, and all the transitioning back and forth. I lose my train of thought, and I lose some of the information because I'm always taking notes. So these applications, they record, they transcribe, they summarize, they pull out the action points. So 5 minutes after the meeting's done, I can send off all the notes and summaries to the people who I'm working with, instead of having to spend hours transcribing and figuring it all out. It's been a huge time saver. I've been loving it. And there's so many different options, and they're really easy to implement. And I'm sure there's someone with a creative mind around your office that'll be able to help you with some other different suggestions as well. So in closing, have flexibility and see diversity as a strength. Education needs to be ongoing, and there needs to be systematic change. Stay in the gray. Life is never black and white. Use your policies as guidelines. Each situation needs consideration on an individual basis. And we really need to remember to have grace with one another. We inhibit learning due to the fear of being judged or saying something that might offend. It's really important to have grace and hold space for one another, to be able to feel safe enough questions and learn without the fear of any kind of retribution. Have humor. We spend most of our lives with the people we work with, and we need to have humor to create connection, enjoyment, and comfort to grow within the organization and with each other. Equity is not about treating everyone the same, because everyone's not the same. We all have different needs, and we all have different needs to be met to be successful. Be curious and value what each individual can bring to the table. Engaged employees are committed, they're passionate and proud. They have a line of sight on their future and their organization's missions and goals. Inclusion isn't about being nice, it's about humanity. And in the end, it's a very strategic business move. And now there's me with my beautiful bowl cut, and how I used to force our cats to wear clothes. I was a quirky little kid. But yeah, showing a little bit more of yourself and having some humor is always beneficial. Thank you. That's me for today.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. Do you want to go ahead and make me the host?
Yes.
And then I will share my screen once you've done that. Don't go away, anybody. We have some questions. There we go. So I'm just going to
Okay.
share my screen. Okay, so thank you, Lisa, for your presentation. You had a couple points in there that have really stuck with me personally. Kind of that neurodiversity is simply just that, another form of human diversity. And I will aim to remain curious about my own assumptions and bias. So thank you for that. We do have a number of questions in the Q&A, which I'll pose them to you as we have time. If we don't have time to answer all of them, perhaps I can forward them to you and you might be able to answer them and we can send that out to the group. There's some that are quite related. Before I get to the questions, I would like to thank everybody for attending. When you do leave the webinar, you'll be asked to complete a short feedback survey. 4 very quick questions, and we just appreciate if you could fill those out because it helps us understand if these webinars are working for you. So I'm just going to pull up some of these questions. There's one here. Do you happen to have a communication styles survey or questionnaire document that you're able to share? This participant said they had a manager years ago that used one with them and it was really grateful, or it was really great. They said it was about 3 questions, but it helped set up a good foundation for a working relationship.
Yeah, I actually have a couple. Some of them are a little bit more dependent on the different types of organizations, if you're out in the community or if it's more office-based. But I can share what I have, or if maybe afterwards, if I can get some more information, I'd be able to kind of configure something that would be appropriate for the situation.
Okay, great. There's another question here. How can we help neurotypical employers understand the double empathy, the neurodiverse communication styles, and especially nonverbal communications cues that that people can find negative or off-putting, but there's no ill intent?
Well, see, that's where I feel that the communication piece is huge, and especially if we have the buy-in from our C-suite or our upper management, having transparency and being open to differences within the workplace. And I guess that kind of speaks a little bit to the communication survey, or being able to have that communication. If it's kind of in 3 domains, it's like, this is how I prefer to communicate, this is how I prefer to learn, and this is how I prefer to work. Like I learn auditorially, and so I can read and take in information, but if I hear it at the same time, I take in so much more and I retain so much more information. It's the same with communication. Some people are very aware when they're in a social situation that I overshare and overtalk all the time, and I, no matter how hard I try to retain, bring it in, I'm just open with my friends. I'm like, I've been alone for 3 hours. You're going to get a whole lot of words. If you need to like rein me in, do it. And having that communication with each other really, really helps out. But by being open and understanding that there's different that everyone thinks and acts differently, and a lot of people, some neurodivergent individuals, we have to learn these societal traits. They don't come innately to us. So like I'm trained in peers training, which is kind of like a social skills training. And like, you wouldn't think of it, but how do you know when you're in a group of people who's going to speak next? Someone typically leans in. So it's like being able to learn those different things and being okay with, if our typical society ways that we do things, if we, once learning about other people's different communication styles, be open to doing things in a different way.
Okay. That kind of links into another question we had here about starting that discussion with an employer about accommodations, particularly if they have never formally disclosed it.
Disclosure is so hard. I I wish it was okay presently that everyone can just be, this is me and this is who I am. Or even the fact that, to have a label, like to be able to move away from it. On one hand, my ADHD drives me bananas. And, I wish, like, and, when I get stuck on something, or, you know, overshare, over talk, or talk off topic, and not being able to rein it in, but then it's also given me so much benefit as well. And it's hard going to disclose. If you do not feel comfortable disclosing, or you don't want to disclose because it's your own personal, information, um, you can say to an employer, I have a hard time with my organization or with different projects, and you can say the specific things. Um, but uh, if you, oh, I just lost my train of thought. If you are disclosing and you need some help disclosing, um, I find that if you disclose like I was describing before, the reasoning behind the traits, instead of saying, I just have executive functioning issues, if you kind of describe it, or issues with transition, I just need a little bit more time, and kind of give a little bit of a possible solution, it's somewhat easier. And I'm finding it's great, kind of like this movement of diversity, equity, inclusion happening, where employers are much more open to it. And I find the barriers are created around not having enough education or understanding about what it actually is. The word diagnosis has such a negative connotation when it just is a natural variant of us.
Right. Great. Thank you so much. We did have a few other questions in the Q&A. We will note those and we will forward those to you, Lisa, and then hopefully we can get a response
And
back.
oh, sorry, and thank you. And if anyone would like to have a conversation or wants to email me directly, my organization is My Mosaic Inclusive HR, and you can contact me, and I'd love to chat it out.
That's great. And we'll have your contact information as well on the resources we send out. Just before we end, we invite you to check out our upcoming events and resources. So please visit the Care for Caregivers website to learn more. March 28th, we've got a webinar, There's More to You Than You Can See, and April 10th, Managing Conflict Safely and Respectfully. Again, thank you so much, Lisa, today. It was a great presentation, really informative. Thank you, everyone, for attending and your engagement in the chat and your questions. It was a great hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. I've been seeing the chats, and I really appreciate all your well wishes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.